You know, it seems like everybody wants to be a gaming style YouTuber these days. And frankly, I really can't blame you all. It's a lot of fun. You get to sit here, play video games all day. You get to make content out of it. Like, it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun, right? But unfortunately, a lot of people, whenever they first open up OBS Studio, they're a little bit intimidated because of how many options and settings there are and how many things you could tweak. And they might have a very powerful PC, but they didn't configure OBS Studio right to get the highest quality footage that they possibly can for their games, for their system. And then, of course, uploading it to YouTube. Because as we all know, if you don't upload stuff to YouTube correctly, it can really crush the quality. No matter how high of a bit rate you might have recorded your stuff, no matter how you exported it, it just doesn't matter. Now, as long as you have an Nvidia-based graphics card for this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys and gals my own personal secret sauce settings that I use to get the highest quality videos out of OBS Studio that my system can push out. So with that being said, let's kind of just jump into it here, shall we? All right, everybody, here's my second instance of OBS Studio opened up for y'all. Now, what you want to do is this here, okay? You want to go into settings, then you want to go into output. Now, by default, this is going to be on simple, but I like really fine controls on what I can tweak and how I want to tweak them, okay? So I always set my stuff to advanced here, okay? So after that, you want to go over to the recording tab, right? Now, right here, folks, right here. By default, this is set to X264 for the video encoder. And X264 does give you some extremely high quality results. It really does. Like, it's the old standard for a reason, right? But this doesn't use your GPU. This uses your main processor, your CPU, okay? And unless you have, a Ryzen 8 core plus, an Intel 10 core plus or Threadripper or some sort of Xeon processor, unless you have a high core count CPU, whenever you use this kind of encoding, you will more than likely see a ton of lag, stuttering, frame drops in your game, as well as encoding errors inside of OBS Studio. Now, I'm not saying that you can't use this, encoder option on one PC while you're either streaming or recording. It's just that it's not as efficient as hardware-based encoding like we're going to use here on our NVIDIA-based GPUs, okay? So if you have an NVIDIA-based graphics card, I want you to do this here, okay? You want to click this little drop-down list right here for video encoder, and you want to click on NVIDIA nvenc H264. Now, this is the old standard, okay? This is the old standard, and that's not a bad thing, okay? It's not a bad thing, but the thing with this here is that you would have to use such a high bit rate. Your file sizes would be monstrous for a 10-minute gameplay video. Back in the day at the settings I used to use, a 10-minute video at 100,000 kilobytes per second was like 4 or 5 gigs big. It took up a lot of hard drive space for that kind of stuff back then. And it's not the most efficient way. Now, on modern NVIDIA GPUs, you can either use X264 or HEVC. Now, HEVC, it is a much more optimized, much more bitrate friendly codec that you can really push a little bit with those smaller bit rates and those smaller file sizes. Now, what I like about this is that, let's say for your average H264 encoder, instead of using 100,000 kilobits per second, you could use, let's say, 75 or 80,000 kilobits per second. And the quality would look the exact same, but again, much smaller file size, which is amazing, folks. It really is. So for this tutorial here, we're going to go ahead and keep it on HEVC, okay? Now, as far as your rate control goes, a lot of people tell you to use CBR and manually input, again, let's just say 60,000 kilobits per second, right? But I actually don't like doing this. I really don't, because 9 times out of 10, what ends up happening is that you use such a high bit rate like this, and even whenever there's nothing, fast moving or anything like that going on in scene, it's still recording at that extremely high bit rate. Like, in other words, you're wasting resources, wasting hard drive space that a lot of people might only have one drive in their system. So what I like to do is this here instead. I like to do CQP, or a constant quality rate, okay? And the thing with this here is that your CQ level is essentially your quality control, okay? Whenever you set it to 0, it is considered lossless, and it is an extremely high quality, extremely high bit rate, like mondo huge space on your hard drive recording. But again, it's the highest quality you can. Again, essentially lossless without actually going to the lossless rate control here. Okay, so what I always do is for H.264, I would always keep this here at a CQ level of 20. Now for HEVC, I always keep this here at a CQ level of 25. Again, HEVC is a much higher efficient codec and it's lower bitrate friendly. So again, you're going to have the same quality at a CQ level of 25 that you would at a H.264 CQ quality of 20 here, okay? So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and go down here to preset. Now I always go ahead and put mine on 6. In the test that I've done behind the scenes here, P6 and P7 look the exact same to me. So there's that, you know. So I would go ahead and just keep this here to P6. Now, if you have an older Nvidia graphics card, like, you know, a 900 series, a 1000 series, you might need to tweak this here a little bit to where, like if you get some stutter in game, some encoding overload here in OBS Studio, you might need to make tweaks with this here, okay? But if you have a 3000 series on up, I would go ahead and keep this here at P6, okay? Now for tuning, going to keep this here on high quality. It's just fine. For multi-pass mode, I recommend you do keep this here on 2-pass. And for cycle visual tuning, a lot of people might disagree with this here, but I actually recommend for local recordings at such a high bitrate, I just leave it unchecked because these two settings here actually do use your CUDA cores and not the onboard nvenc encoder chip that Nvidia has on these cards. Okay, now the way I see it is this here is that these settings here are really, really good if you're using a lower bit rate, especially for streaming to Twitch, YouTube, Kick, wherever it might be. Okay, but since we're going to be using such a high bit rate for these local recordings here, we don't need to, as it says right here, that it optimizes the use of the bitrate to perceive overall visual quality. You don't need to do that, again, because we are using such a high bitrate for recording, okay? Now, after that, you want to go ahead and just hit apply. Oh, yeah, dub. And sorry, guys, before I forget here, for your keyframe interval, it's an industry-wide recommendation to set this here to 2. And you know what? That's exactly what I follow. Whether I'm streaming to Twitch, Kick, YouTube, making recordings here on my workstation, doesn't matter. I set this here to 2. And then the tab that a lot of people seem to forget about is your audio tab. Now, by default, this is set to 160, but I just go ahead and come in here and I set all these audio channels to 320. So that way there, you are going to get the highest fidelity audio that you can get out of OBS Studio. Now, as far as the advanced tab here go, I wouldn't change anything in here whenever it comes to your video output here. I always recommend you leave this here on NV12, Rec 709 for the color space, and the color range is limited. Now, there will be some situations where you do want to come in here and change this stuff to something other than what is set here right now, but those are very specific use cases, and if you don't need to change these settings, I would not. Now, we're going to go up to the audio tab here, okay? Nothing major. Like, y'all should already have this part here set up for your mic, your desktop audio, all that jazz. But there is one thing I would like you to change if you haven't already, and that is right here, peak meter type. You want to set this here from simple peak to true peak. Other words, folks, this will give you a much more accurate representation of what your true levels are down here in the audio mixer. All right, now that part of the tutorial there was for everybody that had an RTX 3000 series or lower, but what if you're one of the people out there that have an RTX 4000 series, like a 4090, 80, 70, 60, so on and so forth? You have access to the Nvidia AV1 encoder, and it's a lot more efficient than even HEVC. So with that being said, here's my secret sauce settings for the stuff I do here in OBS Studio with my RTX 4080 and the AV1 encoder. Alrighty, folks, here we go, okay? Now again, for the recording format, I go ahead and use .mp4 for the video encoder. Of course, the Nvidia nvenc AV1. I have 2 audio tracks here for how I split my stuff in recording. One track is my game desktop audio. My second audio track is for my microphone, so I can adjust the levels independently of one another. Then as far as my actual encoder setting goes, for rate control, again, I use CQP for that, for the ability for the encoder to adjust the bit rate on the fly based off what's going on in the scene. And again, because this is a much more efficient encoder than even HEVC, instead of using 20 or 25, I actually use 30, and it's the exact same quality level as HEVC at CQ level of 25. So it's really cool, and again, much lower on bit rate, which means it uses up way less space on your system's hard drive. Keyframe interval, again, to tuning, high quality, multipass, 2 passes, quarter resolution. And again, because we're using such higher bit rates for local recordings, I go ahead and leave these here unchecked. Now, this here might be kind of controversial to some people, because this is mainly only used if you are recording, you know, high resolution, like 4K, 8K plus, high frame rate stuff. Normally, I would tell people to go ahead and put this on P6 for, you know, the better quality stuff. But whenever you actually use P1 or P2 on the Nvidia 4000 series of graphics cards, besides the RTX 4060 and 4070, because they don't have the dual encoders from what I know, the 4080, 4090, they have dual encoders, okay? So whenever you select P1 or P2, that actually activates the second encoder for both AV1 and HEVC. So whenever you're recording that extremely high resolution, high frame rate stuff, it actually splits the load between the two encoders to encode them quicker and way more efficiently than just trying to do it on one. It's actually a very big brain move by Nvidia to do that. But what I do whenever I use AV1, just to make sure my card is working as efficiently as possible, I actually set this here to P2 to activate the dual AV1 encoders, even though I record my stuff at 1080p, then upscale to 1440p in DaVinci Resolve later. And the way I see it is that this here doesn't add any kind of file size to the overall finished product whenever I get done recording here in OBS Studio. So for me, it's kind of just a no-brainer. I'm all about efficiency, making sure my system isn't being as taxed, as much as it could be, and this does it for me. And besides, if my graphics card's working too hard, how could I nail those flick shots in COD? It's actually a lie. I never hit those flick shots. I just can't do it. And well, what does this type of video quality look like? I'm glad you asked.
Loading fresh mag!
So yeah, it's that simple to get extremely high quality video out of OBS Studio with an Nvidia graphics card. Now, if you happen to have a different graphics card, like one from AMD or Intel, unfortunately, I'm so sorry, I cannot help you there because I have no access to any of that hardware to try. But I can do a video next time to show you all how you can get extremely high quality video if you want to use your CPU based encoder, in other words X264 as well. Like, yeah, the file sizes are going to be a lot larger, but the overall picture quality, it will blow your mind. Like, we're talking basically lossless without being that taxing on your system, okay? Like, it's insane. But if you want to see more content like this here on the channel, do me a huge favor. Sound off down below. Let me know. Get subscribed. Get this video liked. I will greatly appreciate it. Lets me know I'm doing a good job too. Once again, y'all, my name's Terry. Thanks a lot for coming by, and I'll catch you guys and gals next time.